Have you been trying to lose weight without much progress? Do you have an autoimmune condition and wonder how to manage that alongside your other health goals? Have you got no idea what autoimmunity is and you're not really sure whether you even need to know about it? Well, autoimmunity is something that I feel we should all have some awareness of so that you're empowered to be in control of your health and your weight in the long term. I have Victoria Hamilton, registered nutritionist and autoimmune expert, on the podcast today. And together, we're delving into everything autoimmunity, from what it is, why it happens, and how it's linked to stubborn weight, and of course, what we can do about it. Welcome to the Thriving Metabolism. I'm Louise Digby, registered nutritionist, women's weight loss expert, and founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. It's my mission to empower you so that you and your metabolism thrives and you never have to go through diet misery again. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Victoria Hamilton, and I'm very excited to get stuck into everything about autoimmune conditions today. So, welcome to the podcast, Victoria. Thank you so much for joining me. Perhaps you could start us off by sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do, and kind of what brought you to this kind of area of expertise.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So, as you said, I am a registered nutritionist and I'm an expert in autoimmune disease. I got into this field actually when I was very young. I got diagnosed with alopecia areata. I was 7 years old. And I feel like autoimmune disease has almost always been part of my life. When, going back to when I was seven, hair loss it was just seen as hair loss. I didn't realize that there was this issue with the immune system. But over time, I went on to develop psoriasis. And actually, then in my 20s, I developed chronic fatigue syndrome. So, as part of that, I realized that the thread was that they all related to inflammation and autoimmune disease. And actually, my brother then got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when he was 30 and I was in my early 20s. So I feel like it's always been part of my life. It's always been present there. But because of that, I started learning a lot about the science, and I went on to university to study biochemistry and immunology. And I did a dissertation on vasculitis, which is a type of autoimmune disease that affects your vessels. And then I don't know really what happened, but I went traveling and came back and decided I want to work in the corporate world. And I became a chartered accountant, but I was already really struggling with fatigue at that point. But I did stay in that world for 12 years, 12 to 14 years. But at that point in my early 30s, my chronic fatigue syndrome got really bad. I knew I needed another option. And that's when I came across the college that I ended up studying at, which is ION. And I just went to one of their sessions and realized, oh, wow, there is something that I can do for myself, because I was told by the endocrinologist that when he diagnosed the chronic fatigue syndrome that I needed to rest more. And I didn't feel at that point that I needed any more rest because I was falling asleep everywhere. I was sleeping all weekend. I knew I needed to do something. And that's when I discovered nutritional therapy and functional medicine and decided I wanted to train in that. And it felt quite a good way to put my science knowledge into clinical practice. And that's why I became a nutritionist. And I always knew that I wanted to work with people with autoimmune disease. I started working with people with multiple sclerosis because that was my main focus when I started my training. And then through that, I now work with clients with lots of different conditions, including multiple sclerosis, alopecia, psoriasis, arthritis, and they're some of the main ones, but even some very rare autoimmune conditions as well.
Yeah, it's incredible that you were diagnosed with autoimmune conditions so young. And it kind of seems like you almost meant to go into this world to help people with autoimmune conditions. Now, I think it can be a bit confusing for people because autoimmunity can present in so many different ways. There are so many different types of autoimmune conditions, and it seems like as time goes on, more and more conditions get kind of reclassified as autoimmune as well. So perhaps you could explain for us what actually autoimmunity is, what it means, and kind of how it comes about.
Very simply, when we talk about autoimmune disease, it's when your own immune system starts attacking self tissue, and that can be an organ. So it could be attacking, for example, your liver or your kidney, but then there are other, or for example, with alopecia, attacking the hair follicle. But there are also these systemic autoimmune conditions where the immune system will target a particular component in the cell or a particular receptor. And that's why somebody will present with lots of different symptoms, because it's affecting lots of different areas of their body, because your cells are in most parts of your body. So that's simply, it's just your immune system is attacking your self tissue. But then the complexity comes up, well, why is your immune system doing that? And many years ago, they were looking into the fact that the immune system got confused, and that's why it started attacking self tissue. But I think as the research has evolved, they realized that these different mechanisms in place, and even infections are one of the main drivers for autoimmune disease. So these infections will go into our cells, seep into our cells, cause dysfunction, and then your immune system does the right thing. It sees something that isn't right and it wants to clear it out of your body. But unfortunately, as part of that, you then end up with symptoms. So there's lots of different reasons it occurs, but it's when your immune system is dysfunctioning for many different reasons, and it's causing you to have these symptoms, which are often chronic.
So why do some people seem to be more prone to autoimmune conditions than others? Because we know that autoimmune conditions, once you've got one, you're more likely to have another. So why does that happen?
Yeah, and that's what happened with me as well, and I'm just always conscious of that. And the reason is, I mean, there's normally three elements when it comes to an autoimmune condition. We have this genetic susceptibility. So if I look at my family, most people who are ill with an autoimmune condition, or they're living with a chronic autoimmune condition. So it's definitely that genetic piece, but it's not where we will find one specific gene that is causing it. It's normally a collection of different genes together that can cause that autoimmune response. So that's one element. Genes are only a small percentage, to be honest. It's when your genes are in a certain environment. So the environmental trigger piece is almost the biggest piece to look at, and that can be anything from an infection, a chemical toxicity, food sensitivity. There can be lots of things in our environment that can cause that issue. And then the last piece is there will be something that is firing up the immune system. So it needs to be in front of the immune system. And things that trigger the immune system are called antigens, and they fire up the immune system. But there needs to be a breakdown in a barrier. So we've got all these barriers in our body that protect our blood and our vessels from the outside world. We've got the gut, we've got the mouth, we've got our eyes, we've got our nose. All these areas of barriers, and when they break down, it means that whatever's firing up your immune system, for example, if it is a chemical, it then is in the bloodstream, or if it's a bacteria in your gut, it's then got into the bloodstream and it fires up the immune system, and then this autoimmunity happens in the body. So it's normally those three elements: the genetic susceptibility, an environmental trigger, and then a breakdown of a barrier.
Okay, so there needs to be a combination of things going on in order for our immune systems to start kind of attacking our own cells and tissues. It's not just something that kind of happens randomly because you've got the genes and that's that.
No, no, definitely not. There's that susceptibility piece. And if you feel that there are people in your family who may have arthritis, or maybe some form of hair loss, or any of the autoimmune conditions, it's just always good to be aware of that. And I mean, we should all be living as healthy a life as we can do, both physically and emotionally. So it's good practice to do that, but it's good to have an awareness of it if it is in your family, or if you have one, because as you said, you're more susceptible to developing others if you already
Mm.
have one.
And I think this is good information for everyone to be listening to, because autoimmune conditions are becoming more and more common. And the like we were saying, there's so many different ways that it can present, and many, many different symptoms that can come as a result from that. So how does someone start to figure out whether they have an autoimmune condition going on?
Firstly, it's checking in with your own body. What symptoms do you have? And going to your doctor to discuss those, because they can do lots of different tests. You might start by doing a full blood count, so looking at your immune cells and different markers in the blood that might give an indication of a chronic illness, like look it's specifically around like your white blood cells. But they can actually test for these things called auto antibodies, and that is an antibody to a cell, so part of self tissue. As I said, it might be a component in the cell or it might be an organ, and they can test for that. Unfortunately, not all autoimmune conditions have auto antibodies that can be tested, but that might be part of your diagnosis. And this is what I struggled with actually when I was doing my dissertation, that I didn't realize that you diagnose something just by looking at a range of different symptoms. And that's what can happen, especially with systemic autoimmune conditions like lupus. When it comes to alopecia or something like psoriasis, obviously you can do, your doctor can review, or dermatologist can actually look at the skin or the hair loss and diagnose you that way. So there's normally quite a few different elements dependent on the autoimmune condition. But first, observe your symptoms. And I ignored a lot of my symptoms for a long period of time. Even though I had alopecia and psoriasis, when it came to the chronic fatigue, I just thought that was normal to be falling asleep everywhere and to go to an hour-long exercise class and have to spend 5 days recovering from it. I just thought that was normal. So it's good to observe your symptoms, talk to somebody else about it, because then you get a different opinion, and go and see your doctor. That's the best way to get diagnosed.
Yeah, and I think often we are just told that it is normal to feel tired. It's normal to have some of these symptoms, and even our doctors can tell us that we're just a bit run down, or we just need more rest, like you were told as well. But the message here is that there's often more to it, and we do need to be our own health advocates and try and dig a little bit deeper so that we can get to the root cause of these issues and actually thrive and have a really good quality of life rather than just survive and scrape through each day.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how achievable is it to put an autoimmune condition into remission?
Well, in my clinical practice, I see different results. And if somebody's autoimmune condition is, for example, due to a food sensitivity, for example, with celiac disease, it's being triggered by gluten, you take gluten out and the symptoms will get a lot better quite quickly. So that's a very straightforward approach. Unfortunately, it's not always that easy. So taking away that environmental trigger. But what you need to find for each individual, and I had to find this for myself as well, what is your trigger? What is causing the issue? Is it coming from your gut? Is it something going on at the cellular level? Have you got nutrient deficiencies? But once you find out what's triggering it for you and you start to remove that, then you can start to heal your body and recover in that way. And once you remove the trigger, the environmental trigger that is actually creating the autoimmune response, you can then reverse your symptoms quite quickly. But it can take from 3 months to 2 years to get to that point. And
Mm.
unfortunately, not everybody is able to reverse their symptoms. I feel very lucky that it's been 9 years now since I had hair loss and issues with my skin and the fatigue. But as being a nutritionist, it's not that just changed and I just get on with my life. I'm thinking about my health all the time, and I love doing that. I'm feeling energized for it. I actually eat lots of delicious food, and I'm doing these lifestyle practices that make me feel happy. So it's all very positive, but you do have to maintain your health. It's
Mm.
not just going to be, a switch one day you're feeling loads better. But I think, and that's always important. I had a client actually that came to me once and he said, "When can I eat normally again?" And I said, "What do you mean eating normally?" And he said, "Well, when can I start eating chocolate bars and everything again?" And I said, "Let's just wait and see how you get on." And he had arthritis. And he completely transformed his diet. His arthritis and all his symptoms went away. And in our last appointment, I was like, "Well, what are you planning to do?" And he was like, "I'm not going back to that food ever again." And he was so happy with his diet, how he was feeling. He didn't want to go back to eating what he called normal food. He's quite happy with that. So it's very personalized, as I'm sure you're aware. Like with your health, it's all about what's triggering it for you. But I've seen some phenomenal results in people, and I feel I've seen it myself as well. So I do believe it is possible, but you do have to do a bit of digging to understand what's driving it for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see people with autoimmune conditions as well, particularly with thyroid autoimmunity is something that I see all the time in my line of work with
Yeah,
more weight loss side of things. And, we see that go into remission quite often. And sometimes it takes quite a while, it can take quite a long time to get that kind of full remission to happen. But again, with my clients, we're always talking about it being a journey and talking about how we need to embrace the long-term change and make habits that are going to last. And it's, I think, particularly important for autoimmunity, isn't it? Because, like you say, you've got to keep maintaining your health and you can't go back to how things were before because that's what was causing the issues in the first place, right?
exactly. Yeah.
So, how does someone get started with addressing autoimmune issues? Because when we're talking about it, it kind of sounds like it could be quite difficult to start identifying what those triggers are and what the underlying causes are. So, how can someone get started with trying to address their autoimmunity and put it into remission?
Well, at the heart of autoimmune disease is inflammation. That's normally a driver. So, outside of everything else and understanding what your environmental trigger is, if you just focus on the inflammatory piece, there's a lot of dietary things that you can do to help with that. So, the first place I'd look is your diet. And when it comes to diet, I have two things that I normally focus on with my clients. It will be nutrient density, and I had to focus on this myself, and anti-inflammatory foods. And you need those two things in combination. So just it's worth just looking at your diet and thinking about the potential inflammatory foods that might be in your diet. When I'm talking about inflammatory foods, I'm meaning more processed foods, more high sugar foods, foods that are charred and overcooked meat, that type of thing, and take those out of your diet because they are going to be stimulating inflammation probably for most people to some extent. And then I try not to go down too much unless I think it is going to be very important for my client down the restriction piece. Start with just focusing on getting as many of those nutrients in your diet as possible. And each plate of food should be a way to nourish you and be kind to your body. And there are lots of lovely powders that I would recommend adding into your food, into your smoothies, or things like cranberry powder. You can get acai powder, lucuma, moringa. These are very easy ways that we can just add a little bit more nutrient density into our diet. And one of the nutrients that I find is lacking in a lot of my clients' diet, why I think it's worth mentioning it, is the omega-3s that we get from oily fish. And I talk about it a lot, but it is just because I see it lacking in a lot of people's diets. And unless you're conscious of it, it's very easy to go a week without eating any omega-3 rich foods. And you can get it from plant-based foods like flaxseed, walnuts, and chia seeds, but it's not the most active version of the omega-3. So that's something to be conscious about as well, because those omega-3s are really anti-inflammatory. So when you're in an inflamed state, it's a really nice way to bring down the inflammation.
I mean, I'm guilty of it all the time, not getting enough omega-3, especially in the winter, because I find that I eat a lot of fish in the summer because I love
Yeah.
having salads. But in the winter, I forget to eat it. And I have a really good quality omega-3 supplements in the fridge. I forget to take them. I'm terrible. But yeah, I completely agree. Omega-3 is one of the biggest nutrients in terms of not having enough of it in the diet across the board, and one of the most impactful and anti-inflammatory nutrients when we have it in the right balance. So what about stress? How big is stress in autoimmunity?
Stress to me is like the foundation. And if you are stressed or you're in a state of chronic stress, which I think a lot of people are at the moment, they've got a lot of things going on in their lives. And stress isn't always a bad thing. You might have lots of exciting things going on, and that's actually quite stressful to the body as well. But it's the foundation. So it just means if you get one of those triggers and those foundations aren't robust, and you get a virus, it just means that you're more likely to be impacted and end up with a chronic illness or autoimmune disease as a result of coming across that environmental trigger. Whereas
Mm.
if your nervous system is calmer and it doesn't have to be calm all the time, but you are in that parasympathetic state more often during your daytime, you're just in a much stronger position to be able to defend your body against various different things. And when I see, because I run a lot of the Dutch Plus tests with my clients, and that will test your cortisol levels. And I either get clients who will have extremely high cortisol levels, so they're in that very high state of stress. I'll have clients who have literally no cortisol, so they are, flatlining, kind of chronic fatigue type picture,
Mm.
or they're just burning through their cortisol very quickly. The body's not getting the benefit of the cortisol, and cortisol is anti-inflammatory in nature, so it's a good thing. It's there to support us. It's part of a healthy stress response. But it's when we're in that chronic state of stress that it can cause our foundations to become completely imbalanced and weak. And as a result of that, if we have any mold in our house, or if we get a virus, or if we eat a certain inflammatory food, we're just far more likely to have that autoimmune response as a result of it.
I can definitely relate to that. A few years back, I found out that my thyroid wasn't functioning as well as it should be, and I had raised auto antibodies to the thyroid. And I tried all sorts of things to get them down. And, I cut out dairy and gluten, and I worked on my gut and all these things. And my antibodies actually went up. And it was only when I started properly focusing on stress management that they came back down again. And I was able to reintroduce the things that I cut out successfully and still maintain kind of lower antibody levels. So it's incredible the impact that stress can have even when you're eating really, really well. And that's the thing that I'm always talking about with my clients as well. When it comes to weight loss, you can be eating all the right things, but if you're not taking steps to manage stress and manage cortisol, then a lot of it can feel like it's a bit futile.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it was almost the last piece for me. I call it rest. I've got a new program that I'm developing. And actually, the first piece of it is rest. And I feel like all my clients are doing, and actually, a lot of people that I speak to in my community are doing so much in their diet, they're exercising, they're, meditating. But meditating is quite a good thing, but they're doing it in more of a doer. I'm going and doing this.
Mm,
And actually, how often are you sitting on your sofa and just listening to birdsong, or just sitting there and doing nothing?
mm,
When was the last time you had a rest day? And 9 times out of 10, no one is doing that.
yeah.
And I try to get into the discipline myself because I love variety. I love doing lots of things. I love my business. And I have to force myself to rest. And when I do, I feel so much better. You're more creative. My energy's better. So even if you're just doing one day a month where you have literally no plans and you're resting, it's going to do you the world of good. And then adding into that some other restful activities throughout your day or throughout your week, I think it is huge. And that can be such a game changer in anybody's health. And it's so
Mm.
overlooked, which is a shame, really.
Yeah, I think we almost need to schedule in that rest day, don't we? Because I'm just thinking about when I try and make plans with friends, we're looking at like 5 months into the future because everyone is just completely booked out. And I know many of them don't have a single day to themselves. They've got kids and their weekends are absolutely full of activities, and obviously they're working as well. So they get absolutely no downtime. And every little spare bit of time they have, they're trying to catch up with friends and family. And, I think we shouldn't feel guilty about saying no to some of these things and just carving in some time for ourselves because it's so, so important for our well-being.
Yeah, 100%.
So I've mentioned weight a couple of times, and I really wanted to kind of, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but I kind of wanted to spell it out a little bit more for our listeners, the link between weight gain and autoimmune issues. So what is the link there? How can your immune system be involved with your weight gain?
Well, when it comes to weight gain, there can be a few different things going on. You mentioned about, thyroid autoimmune disease, which is also called Hashimoto's. That's going to affect your metabolism. So if you have any kind of issue with your thyroid. It doesn't actually have to be the autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's. It can just be having low thyroid hormones or having antibodies, or it is worth knowing what your current thyroid baseline is. And I know there's numerous tests that you can do to find that out. And you also get your thyroid stimulating hormone tested through your doctors as well. So that can affect you. And I have a lot of clients that will come to me and they are restricting their diet, they're not eating much food, they're exercising, and they're seeing no weight loss at all. And that's because your thyroid needs nutrients to to operate. If your thyroid isn't functioning well, you're going to find weight loss extremely difficult. So that's part of it. So that's actually a type of autoimmune condition that is linked to weight gain. That would be one of the symptoms actually of Hashimoto's.
Mm.
But then there are these underlying imbalances that relate to both weight gain and autoimmune disease. So blood sugar dysregulation is huge in autoimmune conditions, and I talk a lot about not just daily things that you can do and dietary strategies that you can do to help keep your blood sugar in balance. There's a thing called, I'm sure I've talked about this before, but there's a thing called insulin resistance, where our cells stop responding to insulin. And you see this in autoimmune disease because there's something called oxidative stress, which is where we have more free radicals than antioxidants. And when our cells are dysfunctioning, they actually produce more free radicals. They create a danger response around them. And that can disrupt our cellular function. And as a response to that, our body isn't able to regulate our blood sugar very well. And what that can mean is that we're not able to utilize the energy in our adipose tissue either, which means, again, weight loss is very, very difficult. So that can be a piece of it as well. So there are because a lot of these underlying systems are similar with both weight gain and autoimmune disease, and they can be interlinked, and that can be an issue. And then lastly, we have inflammation. So that oxidative stress can actually go on to create inflammation because, as I said, your cells feel like they're in danger because they're surrounded by these free radicals that are destructive. And then suddenly you have this inflammatory response. So your body is in almost a state of stress at that moment in time anyway, because it is inflamed. And when we're inflamed, we're less likely to be using our energy and losing weight because your body is in survival mode. And as a result of that, your cells are likely dysfunctioning as well. So you're not able to create energy in the body. And that's actually how we lose weight and, burn the fat that we've got stored. So that system doesn't work efficiently either when we're in an inflamed state. And I have a lot of clients that will come to me with inflammation and, they might be carrying the weight around the middle. That's normally a sign that that's linked to inflammation. And when we work on the anti-inflammatory aspect, so with anti-inflammatory foods, but removing the trigger, working on that gut, they just lose weight as a result of doing that in and of itself. They don't really need to be doing intense exercise. Actually, sometimes that can make it worse. Restricting their diet was affecting their thyroid and their inflammation and their blood sugar. So these are things that I've seen work with clients. And it doesn't always happen straight away because obviously these systems I was talking about can take time. But within 3 months, they've lost the weight that they were looking to lose. And it's in a much healthier way as well, doing it this way. And it actually helped their autoimmune condition too.
Yeah, it's so good to hear you talking about this because I talk about it all the time about how, so often eating less and exercising more, it doesn't actually get you the results that you're looking for when you've got these underlying imbalances. And if you've got oxidative stress, inflammation, deficiencies, gut imbalances, you name it, eating less and exercising more doesn't address those issues. In fact, oftentimes it makes it worse because you're getting even fewer nutrients in, you're causing more stress, you're making your body demand more nutrients because you're working out more, and it can actually make your health deteriorate even further. So yeah, your philosophy is very similar to mine in terms of really focusing on optimizing health in order to make weight loss a happy side effect of that rather than just trying to starve yourself or burn off those calories.
Exactly. And there is actually a genetic variation, which is a single nucleotide polymorphism, which is around a cytokine called IL-6, interleukin 6. And that can be flared up by doing too much intense training. And what that means is that you're far more likely to develop inflammation from exercise if you have variations in this gene. So you can see actually doing really intense exercise, inflaming yourself, which is going to stop you from being able to lose weight, is just going to end up being a vicious cycle, and it's going to deplete you of energy, so you're not going to be feeling great either.
Mm.
So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, so interesting. How can our listeners find out more about what you do? How can they connect with you online?
Well, the best way is to head over to my website, because I've got all my free resources and everything in there. I've got the Autoimmunity Recovery Plan, which is a great place to get started. And I also have my podcast, The Autoimmune Reset. But my website is www.theautoimmunitynutritionist.com. And as I said, you'll find all my free resources over there. And I also have a blog.
Amazing. Yeah, I was checking out your blog and there's so much information on there. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. But we'll pop all those links in the show notes so everyone can find you easily and tag you on Instagram and all that good stuff. But thank you so much for joining me today, Victoria. It's been so interesting. And I just know our audience will have learned so much and feel much more empowered on their wellness journeys.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed that one. If you're ready to stop dabbling, stop Googling and doing all the trial and error, and you're ready to take a targeted and strategic approach to your well-being and your weight loss journey, then why not join me for my upcoming Metabolism Masterclass, where I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps that my clients take in order to support their metabolisms and lose weight consistently and without restrictive dieting, without having to give up their favorite foods, and most importantly, not having to count calories. You can find out more about that by visiting my website, louisedigbynutrition.com, or the link is also in the bio of my Instagram page. If you want to leave me a question for the podcast, then why not visit speakpipe.com/Louise Digby, where you can leave me a voice note that I will listen to and answer on the podcast. If you haven't already, then make sure you hit follow, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And if you've got a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you would take just a moment to leave me a little review about how the podcast has impacted you on iTunes. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.